Good morning and welcome to Ed's World, where it's always morning, even in the afternoon. I am your host, Jay Edgar, and I am joined today by philosophy YouTuber Anavultus. Anavultus, welcome to Ed's World.
Hello, I'm Anavultus. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. On a day that we were saying this off mic before, you are definitely overdressed for where you're living right now, and I'm underdressed compared to what my audience is used to seeing me in because it's that Wisconsin weather. We have all four seasons in 1 week. It was 60s, 50s, maybe even down into the 40s for the last 7 days, and just out of nowhere today, we hit 85 degrees and full humidity. So I'm not going to
Yeah,
turn the air back on for one day.
yeah. Radar fit, everybody.
Yeah,
Radar fit.
but we've got a pretty full show today. I've been joking on Twitter all day that we're going to pretty much spend 85 minutes talking about the impeachment and 5 minutes talking about the rest of the news, but we're not actually going to do that. We've got a bunch of stuff to talk about here. We'll try and keep this show moving right along. It looks like we're going to be talking about the Greta Thunberg Climate Summit to start out, what the Climate Summit was, what Greta's speech was, and kind of how global warming got to the point that it's been in the last couple of years. As I mentioned, we will be talking about the impeachment and the timeline of it, and we'll be going off notes a little bit on this because, as always, in the last 24 hours, the story has changed again. We'll be talking 2020 in this show, as we always do, because our favorite military presidential candidate, Tulsi Gabbard, has made it back onto the debate stage, and the debates have gone back to 2 nights. And Warren continues to rise in the polls. The Des Moines Register reported on a guy who decided he wanted to get some money on Venmo for beer and then donate all of the excess. And Anheuser-Busch put some money behind him until they found a tweet by him. And then we found out that the reporter that found the tweet wasn't so innocent himself. We'll talk a bit about that. And to close out the show, especially given my guest's background in philosophy, we will be talking about the Joker movie that's coming up and the controversy that surrounds it. It is going to be all of this and more over on Ed's World. Thanks for watching this over on YouTube Live. And thanks for checking out the replay over on BitChute. If you like what you see, go ahead and hit that like button. That helps to show YouTube what people should be watching. And if you haven't already, if you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well. That really helps us out to move up the charts. Ed's World is available on audio platforms Apple Podcasts, Google Play Podcast, and Stitcher. If you are over on Apple and you enjoy what you hear, give us that 5-star rating and a good review. That helps us move up the charts and helps other people hear the message. Ed's World is proudly partnered with the Freedom Scoop Media Group. Our merch shop is open right now. We have wonderful t-shirts out there, like, let me get this queued up here. This Proudly American t-shirt we have over in our shop, that is one of my favorites right now. The Generational Gap does have their own t-shirt over there. I don't have my own yet, so if you want to see some cool Ed's World merch, go ahead and hit Jacob over there, and we'll see if we can't move something like that into the shop. And make sure, no matter what you buy, even if it is the Generational Gaps t-shirt, you use that promo code JEdgar for 15% off at checkout. After a lengthy introduction, it is time to learn about the most important part of this show. So, Anavultus, you've got a bit of an interesting story from what I've been hearing from your channel and from what we talked about off mic. So, why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
All right, I'm Anavultus. I am a YouTuber who started out doing gaming, but who also got into theology, politics, philosophy, music composition. Pretty much anything is what I'll do, and I'm just an all-around intellectual when it concerns varying things. So people like picking my brain. Some people have called me a living encyclopedia. I don't mean to say that I'm smarter, but just that has been the perception of some people surrounding me.
Well, you said that you started out with gaming, but you've done some other stuff. You've got some really good, like I said, philosophy videos on your channel. Tell us how that all shook out and how you wound up becoming first a gaming YouTuber and then a philosophy YouTuber. How'd you get into that sort of situation?
Well, the reason I started gaming in the first place was during the big age of success for a lot of gaming YouTubers, and they were making a lot of money. So I decided, why shouldn't I go in and try making some money myself in doing that? Something that I like, which is gaming. So I thought that was very interesting. Now I never really made it big, unfortunately. But more recently, with changing times, and as I've always attempted to optimize both my religious and political views, I ended up coming to a conclusion that I have somewhat differing views from the mainstream. So I decided to express those views, and that's how I really got into uh, more going into the philosophy of things, and that's really where I've been expanding to politically now as well, into how those things interact in, and also in my analysis on the quality of varying ideas.
Well, the link for your channel is linked down below. I made sure to get that in the description. So everybody watching this, go ahead and get down into that description and go check that out for yourself. There's a really good video on Beto O'Rourke as the Emperor, and then a better video explaining how that little video came to be. I just finished watching that before we went live here, so go and check that out. But before we do any of that, I'll go check on the live chat quick, see if there are any questions here or any. Oh, Ron Helton is here to say hi to both of us. One of the friends of the show and one of the most regular listeners to this show. Welcome, Ron. But now it's time to go and talk about what Rob and John were a little bit afraid to talk about on their side, and what other people have been pushing off to the back burner, we're going to put right on the front, and that's going to be the UN Climate Summit. So, at the United Nations in New York, there was a climate conference last Monday in which most people world leaders were coming together to talk about what to do to combat the impending climate change and our impending doom. But the show was stolen as a young Swedish teenager at age 16 got up and was asked a question and delivered a 5-minute speech on climate change, condemning the world for causing it to happen in the first place, and saying that we are at an irrevocable point at this point. So I looked back while I was thinking about this and thought about how many times we have actually been in the crux of a climate crisis. But what did you see on this summit so far?
Well, I haven't really seen that much new about what's been happening with the summit. The research isn't really new in any particular sense. Now, of course, I'm not fully aware of everything that's going on the summit. However, certainly the biggest event news-wise is the arrival of Little Miss Thunberg.
Yeah, that was the best. Now you're not a native to this country, so I know that you said what 12 years you've been here, give or
Yeah,
take.
about yeah.
So it looks like I think you may have missed a couple of these the climate panics that we've had before. We talked a bit about this off mic, but I mean, in my lifetime, when I was old enough to remember, I remember when how do you pronounce that? Chlorofluorocarbons, the propellant at aerosol, was going to be the thing that ended everything, and it caused the hole in the ozone layer. I remember a Time magazine cover in which a blinded sheep was standing next to the shepherd looking out over a Peruvian prairie, and they said that the hole in the ozone layer was what caused the sheep's blindness. Now, we stopped using this as a propellant because it was expensive anyway, and lo and behold, the hole in the ozone layer that they said was never going to be fixed disappeared. But after that, now we had carbon monoxide was the big thing, and then oxides rather of nitrogen was the next big thing, and now it's CO2, a gas that we are all spewing just as we're sitting here talking back and forth with each other. So, what do you think of that progression?
Well, I think it's fair to say that certainly some of these gases are poisonous and polluting in a way that is harmful. So I think it's fair to say that some of those gases certainly need to be held back. But when it concerns CO2, that gas is beneficial for plants, and the reason why it's called a greenhouse effect is because it creates something that's similar to a greenhouse in the sense that they believe that it causes heat to get trapped in the atmosphere. But of course, CO2 is very frequently pumped into greenhouses due to the benefit that it causes to plants. And if we look paleontologically and geologically, what we see is that in the past, there might have been much higher levels of CO2 in the atmosphere than there have been today. And I think that certainly an increase in CO2 is certainly nothing bad. In fact, it might even increase the amount of plant growth and even consequently increase the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Now, when it concerns how strong these gases are and how much they've affected the atmosphere and the environment, what we know is that the biggest greenhouse gas has always been water vapor, not CO2. Water vapor by a long shot has been bigger than CO2. And what we also know is that the impact of certain aerosols that were in the past believed to counteract the impact of greenhouse gases have been, in fact, tested to have been overestimated, which means that consequently the effect of greenhouse gases has also been overestimated. And that's not counting in a lot of other factors and even the question on whether all of this is anthropogenic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things too that I've thought about when all of this comes up, I mean, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, are not a naturally occurring compound. That is something that was man-made to do a certain thing. But carbon monoxide and oxides of nitrogen are well, they're not naturally occurring, but I mean, they occur naturally when something burns. Like if a lightning bolt hits a tree and it starts on fire, due to the incomplete burn, you are going to get carbon monoxide and not oxides of nitrogen, NOx. Those are naturally occurring. Yes, they are heavily poisonous to anybody who breathes them, but they are naturally occurring. Therefore, the ecosystem, I believe, would have a way to counter them.
Well, yes. For many centuries, wildfires have been very natural, and even to the point that around where I live, the forest authorities will frequently artificially set fires to the forests, because if they don't do that periodically, then it becomes a fire hazard when it happens naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So these burnings are very natural, and all this carbon that is being released from fossil fuels indeed come from fossils, which means that it used to be something that was in the biosphere in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And again, I don't advocate for putting or artificially putting more of these gases into the atmosphere, even if they are naturally occurring. That's part of the reason that we changed our emission standards and we put scrubbers into place on the industrial side and, catalytic converters and things in our cars to make sure that we're not pumping excesses of these particular gases in, even though they're naturally occurring. If we add to the problem, we're adding to the problem essentially.
Yeah, I think it's always important to try to keep the environment that we live in clean, or at least livable to a large extent. So I am for getting rid of poisonous substances that might pollute the air that we breathe and that might destroy the ecosystem. But I'm not for essentially taking what has now been revealed to be pseudoscience in pushing away the course of, let's say, CO2, which is not only a very naturally produced compound, but a compound that we know was a lot more common in the atmosphere in the past anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see that as something that could theoretically cause the end of the world, since it is indeed in the world that has been in the past from which we come. So the world has survived this in the past, and I think it will survive this again. And many of these things do occur in natural cycles, and and that's just how it is.
Well, and that's one of the things too that constantly comes up, and it's something that I believe when I talk about climate change is the fact that I believe that human beings are affecting and changing the climate with industry to a much lesser extent than what people like our little Swedish friend would think. But we definitely are we're doing something about it. But I think it's a little bit conceited to think of the fact that human beings could destroy this planet. That survived, if you're an older theorist like I am, that survived for billions of years before humans ever set foot on this planet. Before humans ever evolved out into humanity, this planet was going strong long, long before that. So to think that we're going to destroy it, that's just a little bit conceited to me. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my particular thoughts regarding that is that I don't think I agree with you on the point that the anthropogenic amount of climate change, as in the amount of climate change that is caused by humans, has been overestimated by some of these scientists. And because of that, now they're going forward with plans of selling what they call carbon credits, in which case you can buy the right to release a certain amount of carbon into the atmosphere. And this seems to me like an opportunity for a large amount of corruption, a large
Oh, yeah.
amount of scams, even, as well as an advantage to big corporations.
Well, not only that, it seems like if you're going to be taxing the amount of carbon that you use, that just seems like another step towards redistributionism.
Yeah, I think it certainly would increase the centralization of government as well as the centralization of industry, since large companies will obviously have a better time adapting to this than smaller businesses.
Now, before we get into this little young lady's speech here, I do want to bring up one other point that I didn't have into the notes, but something it's been bothering me, and with your philosophy background, are you familiar with the YouTuber Hexenhammer 666?
I am unfamiliar with that one.
Okay, he's a pagan YouTuber that weighs in on a lot of very sociological components to our society, especially politics. But he brought up the idea that, if we go down to pre-industrialized agrarian ways of life with the current population that we have, we are going to have to clear a lot more land to do a lot more farming and potentially do a lot more harm to the environment that we're already doing. Therefore, if you boil it down to the root of things, if we want to see the end that these people want to see, they're not really sociologists, they're not scientists, they're eugenicists. They want to see 90% of the population go away to reach the
Well,
ends.
in some sense, yes, there are a lot of individuals who are in favor of reducing the population significantly. And I also agree on the point that in order to, let's say, deindustrialize, we would have to increase our usage of land, because a lot of the advantages that industry gives us, a lot of these advantages allow us to produce more with less land, so that less land is required to support a human being. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a big advantage of our technology, is that we're able to use the land more efficiently. And if we don't do that, then we'd have to get rid of our nature preserves, would have to not only pick up all the asphalt, but would have to build farms everywhere. Because
Absolutely.
in the 1800s, there was a concern that this was something that was going to happen, because at that time they did not expect our agricultural technology to advance as far as it has. They did not expect the Haber process to occur. And because of that, they believed that we just were going to run out of land, that we were going to have a problem with overpopulation and mass starvation. Now, today, the reason why there's starvation today is not because we have an overpopulation problem. It is more a political problem and a problem with conflict in various countries, and a problem with corruption.
And of course, the greedy government, well, yeah, corruption. The greedy government's taking the money that they would normally be using to help feed these people in their countries and putting it in their own pockets.
Yeah, certainly.
I don't know. Well, and that's the thing, too. We talk about deindustrialization and what happens there. And I mean, one of the biggest things that we can do with industrialization, like you said, we don't have to use all the land anymore. We can grow an abundance of food and then use preservation techniques that we've perfected in industrialization to keep it in a can until next year.
Yeah. Also, another direction we could go is to go into a post-industrialization instead, wherein we essentially go green. And that's something that a lot of individuals are advocating as well. Now, of course, the problem with that is that only countries that have reached a high level of industrialization are capable and have the wealth in order to do this, in order to go green, which means that essentially for the rest of the world that is not as developed, they would have to essentially be recolonized by the West for that to work. Because otherwise, everyone in those countries would either not do it, in the case that they would stay industrialized and they would keep up the pollution, or if they did deindustrialize, they wouldn't be rich enough in order to post-industrialize, so they would need to either get support from the first and second world countries or collapse. So I think either way, this leads to a large amount of totalitarianism.
Oh, absolutely. And that seems to be the end goal of everything that we see coming from the left at this point.
Yeah, even you even have these reporters on the side of climate, uh, the climate activists. Many of them are socialists, outright
Oh, yeah.
socialists. In fact, to the degree where it's not that socialism is something that they have in addition to their climate activism. It's more that their climate activism is their vehicle to socialism.
You think Great Britain's got the cojones to go and take over 75% of the land in the world again?
I don't think
You
that
brought
the
up
British people
colonization that
really want to at this point. Um, Imperialism and colonialism have become very unpopular in the West,
they
so I don't
have.
think it's likely to happen.
Let's talk about this speech. Now, for those of you who are just catching up with this, very shortly after the climate change summit started, a reporter asked 16-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg what she would say to the world leaders about the fact that this climate change has happened, in which she came into a speech, and I don't have video share done up right now, but I'll describe it to the best of my knowledge. She came up with a speech in which she said that she should be in school across the ocean right now, but she can't be because how dare us for being industrialized and how dare us for actually trying to make an effort in the West to clean up our emissions and clean up our climate change causing gases. And she condemned the world leaders of the Western countries that have actually been making an effort to do this. And yet, a lot of people after the speech brought up the fact that the speech and the ensuing lawsuit that came from a group that was associated with the speech only affects countries that have a negative carbon footprint over the last couple decades, whereas China, with their industrialization, is completely offsetting all of the negative carbon that we have done in this country so far. So you've seen the speech, right?
Yes, I have seen the speech.
Okay. What did you think of that when that first came out?
Well, I thought it was obviously something that she must have thought about or memorized beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So it is certainly something that it was a question she was ready to be asked. Now, when it concerns the actual content of the speech, I would say that you're right in the sense that, of course, she is speaking to the U.S. and to other Western countries, when of course it is in the second world and the third world that you have a lot of industrialization occurring currently, and even in the fourth world as well, um, where the countries that are putting the greatest effort to reduce their carbon footprint, who are doing this, are the Western countries, with a few exceptions, of course, such as Bhutan, which is not as industrialized in the first place. So
Mm-hmm.
it's easier for them to do it anyway. Now, when it concerns the idea concerning her view of economics. She mentioned a myth of endless growth, and I do have to agree that there are certain economists that have overestimated the amount of growth that could occur economically. And just because something can grow and just because there's a trend for something to grow doesn't mean that it will. Now, at the same time, I don't think that's an accurate assessment of the economic models that are used in Western countries anyway, as those models are not so predictive as much as they are reactive to various factors.
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, endless growth. I mean, even or the most MAGA people out there that think that this is going to be going on forever know that there's no such thing as endless growth. I mean, economists out there project that we're due for another recession right now. I don't think we are due for another recession. We just came out of the last one, but economies grow and they shrink. That's just
Yeah,
the nature of things. Nothing's going to
and
be
of course,
endless.
you could say that with technological advancement, that there is, in theory, a great potential for growth. Now, I would say that that is true. However, I would say that it is also a fallacious statement to make because people always say, "Oh, soon we'll have the technology to do this, or we'll have the technology to do that." Why don't you wait until we actually have that technology for that to happen? Now, that being said, so what I mean by that is that while we should not have a doomsday cult that things are going to end because we don't expect anything to change and that at some point things will just collapse, we should also not be in the position of saying that just because we expect things to improve doesn't mean that we shouldn't plan for if they don't improve. So I think it's always good to be level minded on that and to always be aware of where you're going.
I just want to point out the irony right now of the fact that my neighbor, who has a major exhaust leak pre-cat on his car, just left while we're talking about greenhouse gases and emissions. So bravo to that. I don't know if you caught that on mic or not, but I could hear
I
it.
did not hear it.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's loud. Oh yeah, he's coming back in now. He's just moving his car. I can hear him. Here's the thing that a lot of people have brought up, and this is the fact. Like you said, they made it look like this answer was something that was supposed to be off the cuff, but I mean, we all saw through that right away. We saw through the fact that, this was planned, this was a memorized speech, and it was set up so that we made sure that the speech got put out there. But let's look at the social engineering aspect of this. Now, Greta Thunberg is 16 years old. She has Asperger's and a slew of other mental disorders that are actually described in the DSM 5. And Michael Knowles was on Fox News and he pointed this out, the fact that she is a mentally handicapped 16-year-old child from Sweden. And I don't think it was mean, the fact that he said that, but he got ripped to shreds to this over the fact that he said that. And he's, at this point, not welcome to comment back on Fox anymore, which, I mean, I'm okay with that. Right wingers going on a left wing network, I don't understand anyway. But one of the other things that was completely or consistently pointed out with this was the fact that Greta Thunberg did not look like she was 16 on that stage, and I don't know if some of that comes from the Asperger's. I have a cousin with Asperger's, and he does look considerably younger than he is himself. But there is an extent to the point that I think she was dressed up to look like she was younger as well. What do you think on that?
It could be. Now, I have also heard a theory that she might have partial fetal alcohol syndrome and therefore might have a mild case of microcephaly. Now,
Okay.
that being said, I don't. To be fair, from a purely logical perspective, the statement that she made was not a statement that, from an intellectual point of view, demanded her own mind to be an authority. In that sense, I would say that when it concerns the accuracy of her statement, her mental health is, from a logical perspective, irrelevant. Uh, And I will, however, say that what she did say was indeed the peak of climate alarmism,
Hmm.
in the sense that it certainly is silly from my perspective to assume that the world is that bad off when it concerns climate, when it clearly is not. When all the estimates of what was going to happen, all the predictions have not come to fruition when it concerns these things, that the sea level has not risen the way that they expected it to, the temperatures have not risen the way they expected it to, and and a whole host of other things that were initially expected did not occur. So I think someone certainly must be feeding her these ideas to agitate her, in a sense, because as someone who is mentally disabled, she certainly would be someone that is agitated to a greater degree than someone who is not, with the autism and the other and the anxiety, for example.
Okay.
So it certainly is the people around her that are probably pushing her to have such a strong emotional response. Because now, that being said, there are individuals that are totally sound of mind who also end up being radicalized in this way, and even in a more extreme way, such as all the school children that I think this was happening in Germany as well. A lot of school children intentionally began missing school days in order to do climate protests. Um, and this is something that Thunberg was a sort of a spearhead of.
Now, one of the last things that I do want to bring up to this is the comparison of Thunberg versus David Hogg and Nick Sandman, for example. Because, I mean, Hogg was untouchable as well when the Parkland shooting came around. Because he was a kid, and a lot of people got deplatformed and banned over the fact that they went after him being a minor. But the left in this country was very eager as well to go after Nicholas Sandman, and some of them still try and sandbag the kid, even though it was de facto proven that he didn't do anything wrong on this. They still want to ruin his life just based on the fact that the media narrative initially said something bad about him. So, what do you think on the comparisons of those two?
Now, what I will say about those two is that the media itself, if they want to have a consistent standard on who it's okay or not okay to criticize, they should at least try to have consistency in how they apply that standard. So I do believe that it is highly inconsistent in how they treat those. Now, I personally, as I said, I don't really prefer particular mental states as much as the content of the argument. So, in my view, if someone makes a statement independently, as Thunberg presumably made, or at least as she officially made, and as the other two were making independent statements, I think that's fair game to criticize. Now, of course, I personally am also someone who likes to be polite and to have a sort of a sense of chivalry and largesse when it concerns these things. So I don't ridicule these individuals, and I certainly wouldn't advise individuals to ridicule these individuals, particularly because they're children. And there's a reason why we don't let young children vote, and that's because we don't expect them to have necessarily the quality of the opinions. But at the same time, I think it's fair to make an attempt to correct incorrect opinions and to counteract the opinions, especially if children are making them, especially if your own children are making them. I think it's a responsible parent's job to really educate the children and to correct them.
Well, we have put a half an hour into this topic here, so I think we're gonna put this one closed for right now. We'll check in with the live chat here, see if there are any questions in there, and then we'll go on to this impeachment business. So, oh goodness, live chat is busy today. So let's let's welcome in Harvey McLeod. She's Taking a look out here. Ron Helton again is going in. Grizzly Saxon, hello. Big Cat Kayla has returned to have another discussion with us, so welcome in, Kayla. Um, the beard on the right looks cute, so I believe I would be on one on the right, but I mean your beard is quite epic too, so I will default to your beard there. Kayla
Thank
says
you.
she told me to stop eating fast food. I've actually washed this cup because, like I said, it's disposable, and why just toss something out when you can reuse it until it breaks instead of using up all your good dishes, especially while you're on stream. Let's see. Well, we're having a vegetarianism conversation here. Let's the Impossible Burger, soy. I don't know. It doesn't look like I see any questions going on here. But yeah, there's a lot. I'm kind of glad to see this busy. This is great. Helton is putting his kids to bed, so we'll take that. Yeah, it doesn't look like I've got any questions on right now, but we'll go ahead and we'll move along here and we'll talk about the Ukraine story.
All
So
right.
this is a moving target, and we talked about this offline or off mic a little bit too. This is a heavily moving target, and just what I had in the notes doesn't even catch up to this anymore. So, to the best of my knowledge, I'm going to first start by reviewing how we got from the point that we started at to the point that we are at now. So, a couple weeks ago, it came out in the news that there was a whistleblower against the Trump administration based on a phone call that was made, but nobody knew anything else about it. The whistleblower was anonymous, and I always found it funny the fact that if it's against somebody that they don't like, it's a whistleblower, and if it's against somebody that they like, it's a miserable hacker out there. The news story, for the most part, went away based on the fact that we all kind of assumed the fact that most people are most conversations rather that come out of the White House are monitored anyway, so there isn't going to be much that's going to go on that we didn't know about this already. But as we ignored the topic and we talked about the Kavanaugh impeachment and the climate summit, more news came out. The whistleblower came forward and said that he or she did indeed have knowledge of a call that was made that was a quid pro quo. Now, this sent the Twitter mafia into a frenzy, calling for impeachment, of course, and that was the trending hashtag. But for the most part, by the time all of us looked at the news, we were all saying again, everything is recorded in the White House, especially when it goes to a foreign country. So I think Styx was the first one that said, go ahead and release the transcript. So the transcript the very next morning after they decided that they were going to start impeachment was released. But at the same time, Trump gave a UN speech, and it was one of the best speeches of his career. Unfortunately, not too many people saw it because at the same time, Nancy Pelosi called a press conference and gave her famous speech saying that they were going to officially pursue an impeachment inquiry. Now, this did was brought several different committees in the United States, in the House of Representatives, rather, to into they united them all into one particular goal at the end of it. Now, of course, we've had the whistleblower complaint come out at this point. We have people out there with the tinfoil on their head that say that Trump himself was the whistleblower just trying to sow discord, that it was somebody from Trump's family that was trying to do this. All I see out of this here is a play for the Senate. But what have you seen so far on this great
Well,
mess?
I, of course, had been aware of the situation about which Trump had made the inquiry uh, from a number of years back. This, of course, started in 2014 when Hunter Biden got put onto the board for Burisma Holdings, which is a company run by Mykola Zlochevsky. So I was aware of this situation beforehand, Now, the problem that I have in particular, and I'll be full disclosure here, I'm not a Trumpist, so I don't support Donald Trump unconditionally or anything like that. But I will say
You're not a part of the
that
MAGA religion?
no, unfortunately, that I missed the train on that one. Uh, but what I think is a problem about this is that the inquiry that he requested the Ukrainian president to make was, and I read the transcript as well,
Yeah, so did
was
I.
was done independently of any investigation that could have been made about Hunter Biden. In other words, I think that he would have gotten off a lot easier if there had been an official investigation going on before he had made the request for the inquiry. Additionally, I believe that also the withholding of the funds, which has been excused by the Trump administration, although there are certainly questions as to whether it is or is not related to Donald Trump's making the request for the inquiry. Because if it is, then it is a major problem because those are funds that were approved by Congress, and to withhold them for an unofficial investigation, or at least an investigation that wasn't official at the time, would be hugely problematic, especially if that would set a precedent for the president being able to independently start investigations without any of the agencies uh, and without Congress. I think that could be a problem in the future if that's what ends up as being the course of events that has occurred. Now, of course, a lot of this is still confidential. The transcript is not the full transcript of the conversation, so we honestly don't have enough information to make a full assessment. But I will say that if it is true that the funds were being withheld pending Donald Trump's request for the investigation, then that is a major problem.
Well, I want to ask you a question on that, and that is the one of the big talks that came about this was the fact that Zelensky didn't know that there was a possibility the funds were going or could possibly be withheld until long after the funds were disseminated. And I mean, do you think there's any validity to that?
Um, Again, I don't really know, and that's the whole problem. The problem is that a lot of these individuals involved have their own levels of confidentiality, so the investigation is still relatively new. It's only been a very short amount of time.
Mm.
So until this goes further, we won't really have much information on what's going on. Now, of course, the reason why Donald Trump's inquiry is important when it concerns Hunter Biden is because this all was happening at around the time that the Ukrainian government had a revolution, and of course, a lot of money is involved. And of course, whenever there's politics, you always have to follow the money because that's always going to be a major factor in whatever's happening. So, at the same time, money being involved with the the oil companies, there's also money involved in regards to the funds being given to the Ukraine. So this could be a situation where either Donald Trump didn't withhold the funds because of the inquiry, in which case he didn't really do anything wrong in particular. Now, I'm not entirely sure as to where exactly the legal aspect of this would go. Uh, and but if he did, that is a problem. At the same time, if Hunter Biden was involved in some sort of form of political corruption, I think the best person to ask would be Zlochevsky. Of course, Zlochevsky has been involved in court cases ever since 2014, as he had before the revolution been part of the government and has been accused of hoarding large amounts of money and really profiteering off of his political power.
I see. One of the what's where did I want to go with this? Oh yeah, the treaty. There was a treaty out there, and this was brought forward right away on the fact. And this has been something I think may throw a wrench into the entire impeachment inquiry is the fact that under Bill Clinton in 1998, a treaty was reached between the United States and the Ukraine based on the investigation of corruption on both sides. And in the treaty, both sides are required to the terms that they will assist the other in trying to root out corruption in people that are working between the two countries. Now, a lot of people are saying that this means that with this phone call in here and asking the Ukrainian president for help, especially given the fact that Hunter Biden was involved and Joe Biden was bragging about the fact that he supposedly got the prosecutor fired because he decided to withhold the funds, that Trump was doing nothing but holding up his end of the treaty. What do you make of that situation?
Well, if there is a treaty, parties certainly should uphold it. Now, I will say that when it regards the inquiries relating to corruption, I think that it is best to make inquiries regarding those instances of corruptions in an official manner. That is to say, a manner in which an investigation has been opened. So I think that the president asking uh, about this without an investigation being opened separates this from being an official action relating to an investigation into an action that some might construe as potentially being a an action that might be of political import to Donald Trump when it relates to his election.
Okay.
And because he didn't open the investigation first, that's I guess the primary point where the problem is.
Okay. So with that, I mean, you think that he did it at this point? I'm guessing
That he did what?
that he did something that is actually impeachable. That there is a crime here.
I don't know if it is a crime, and that's the question. Because I think that ideally, what should happen is Congress, who have a higher security clearance than we do, and therefore who should be able to access more information, get that information, and that then they can have a debate on that as to whether impeachment should or shouldn't happen. Because currently, what we're missing is these crucial bits of information that determine whether or not all these events are related or whether they are unrelated. Especially since Donald Trump involved Rudy Giuliani in the as he is mentioned in the transcript,
Yeah,
who
I'm not a fan of that by any means.
yeah, and that's what really puts it in the minds of many people as something that is not necessarily related to rooting out corruption so much as it is related gaining political capital, because Rudy Giuliani should, in theory, not be someone who is directly involved in such an investigation, particularly if it is indeed concerning something that could be of political import to Donald Trump. Rudy Giuliani being a close friend of Donald Trump means that there could be, in theory, a conflict of interest.
Not only a
And
personal friend, but I mean on personal retainer as well. He is the personal attorney. He's not a White House official. He's the personal attorney to the president for his private life.
exactly, and that's the problem. I all I'm saying is that if Donald Trump had opened an official investigation with the DOJ beforehand, this would have been okay in the sense that it would not seem to be an instance of corruption. Now, that being said, from what Donald Trump did, I don't think that there's, as far as I am aware, any official law that he has broken. Nevertheless, this to me seems to be a potential slippery slope to someone in the future doing something similar, perhaps with more heinous intentions. So I
Okay.
think certainly there needs to be a law made, or perhaps even a constitutional amendment to ensure that this exact situation doesn't happen again in the future.
Now, there is something, and we brought up, the context of what was going on in Giuliani's involvement to this. There's the question of Adam Schiff's reading of the statement, or at least his parody of the statement, because he immediately turned around and walked it back. But Schiff read this into effect, and I mean, he said things like, listen to what I say because I'm only going to say it 7 more times, which Trump didn't say it 7 more times. We saw the transcript. I mean, still, it was notes, but we know what went on in this conversation, and if there was something bad, the Department of Justice would have already been in onto this. Even if they're in the employ of the president, they still would have been involved if there was something that was bad going on. But the consensus that we hear out of this is the fact that if you read the transcript a certain way, it sounds like Trump is being a classic mob boss and he is trying to say that something's going to happen if something else happens without coming out right and saying that. And I read the transcript. I understand where they're coming from. I understand why they could get to that conclusion if they read it a certain way. But I am above and beyond a fan of the law, the Fourth Amendment, and the Constitution in the whole. And I look at that and I don't see anything in the transcript on anything that they're trying to hang on this passing reasonable doubt, which is one of the
That,
cornerstones of our legal system.
that is true. I do believe that there is nothing in this transcript. There's no point where Donald Trump explicitly does anything that would be breaking the law in any sense or violating the Constitution or in other ways doing anything wrong. The only thing that is suspect, in my opinion, is his reference to opening that investigation relating to Joe Biden's son, which is awfully conveniently timed, which, in my view, is why they're linking that. So the reason why I say that we need more information is because the withheld funds are not mentioned at all in the transcript, or at least in the portion that is publicly available, which means that we actually don't have the information as to whether the two events are related.
Mm-hmm.
So because so I think that the justification here, the way that this can be justified, is that if the request for the inquiry is made unrelated to the funds, then it certainly is something that is Donald Trump being overstepping his usual bounds, but it's not a major problem politically because he's just asking a question. Now, and a question that is indeed relating to corruption in some extent. Now, if it is related to the withholding of the funds, then the question is there an official inquiry? And the reason why I say these two have to be linked is
Mm-hmm.
because these are funds that have been passed by Congress to give to the Ukraine. So this is money that has been dedicated particularly and earmarked for giving to the Ukraine, which means that Donald Trump, as the president, as the executive, has a responsibility to ensure this happens. And if he is obstructing that, not for an official matter of government, but rather something that he is doing independently of any investigation, that's a huge problem when it concerns the powers of the presidency. As I would say that the president, not just Donald Trump, but presidents in the past, have certainly overstepped their bounds in the past significantly in many different ways. and I don't look forward to a new way of that occurring.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, it's kind of in the job description of the president at this point to overstep your bounds. It's probably like line 3 in the job description when they try and tell you what it is you're supposed to do at this point.
Yeah, I think that a constitutional amendment is certainly necessary to pull back what the presidents have been doing, so that to really more expound upon the clauses in the Constitution that allow them to do these things, in order to put a more strict limit on what they can and cannot do. The same thing for the Supreme Court as well, as I think they have overstepped their authority as well in various ways.
I want to take a step back onto the actual events of this. I want to step back into the process and talk about how we got from point A to point B. And one of the most interesting conspiracy theories that I've heard out of this entire thing is the fact that the whistleblower was Trump himself or somebody that was planted by Trump. Now, with the whistleblower complaint, that seems to not hold water as much anymore as it might have prior to this, but there are still people that believe this with all of their heart, that this is somebody that Trump put into place to try and get the turmoil inside of the Democrat Party and turn them against each other on the impeachment thing. Now, the reason I bring this up is the fact that if we look at the numbers and we look at the bases, now, yes, this does seem to have a uniting effect on the Democrat Party, and people that were initially against impeachment have kind of jumped onto the other train. But this has incredibly hardened Trump's base, especially in polling, and his approval numbers have gone up throughout all of this here. So, what are your takes on the fact that this might be planned and planted?
I don't think that it's very likely that Donald Trump, or anyone in his administration, or anyone who's in favor of him in any way attempted to plant this. And I'll give you my reason why.
Go ahead.
The reason I don't think Donald Trump is likely to have been involved in this is because, from a purely rational perspective, uh, this is not something that can easily be construed as a good thing, in the sense that the president of one country goes to the president of another country and secretly requests the president of the other country to give intelligence concerning one of his political opponents. That's the simple analysis of what has happened. And this, of course, it does not look good from a rational perspective. It does not look good from a leftist perspective. And I don't really see how it can be spun as being necessarily a good thing from a different perspective, except for the fact that this also harms Biden in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And even that, it's not directly, except for the fact that Biden is believed to have been involved with the dismissal of a prosecutor who was prosecuting against his son in relating to the event. So, and of course, the Democratic primaries are far from over, which means that this certainly would be a bit early to pull out something like this.
Yeah, that's
Because
usually an October thing.
Yeah, because the Democrats haven't solidified around Biden yet. So if it is something that is leaked from someone in an effort to be pro-Trump, I certainly don't see how it helps him in any way, other than people getting mad at the media attacking Trump once again. But at that point, I would say that the media actually has a point. And this is why Nancy Pelosi, who was previously against the idea of impeachment, decided to jump onto it, is because, unlike the rabid, wild eyed leftists who were impeached Trump from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Pelosi actually still has a quite a political mind. I wouldn't say that I agree with its paradigm, with the paradigm of her mind, that is, but I would say that she at least was reasonable enough to not go on something to impeach Donald Trump until there is an actual plausible story of something that might actually have gone wrong.
Now, I want to jump over and talk on the mega side of this and the people that worship at the altar of the red hat, because if those who listened to Limbaugh this morning would already know the fact that Limbaugh was bringing up the idea that over the weekend it was discovered that in the conversation, Trump was specifically referencing CrowdStrike, which, as we know, is the company in the Ukraine that investigated the DNC server for the supposed Russian hacking that was, to most people, disproved by the Mueller report. And a lot of people on that side of everything are saying that because CrowdStrike was involved, this is Trump's way of trying to find where the Russia collusion probe actually began, where the Steele dossier began, and where all of this started, so he can start from the top and investigate people like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and possibly put them in jail. Something I think has a high unlikelihood of ever happening in our lifetimes.
Yeah, it could be possible that Donald Trump is indeed attempting to investigate those past political opponents. Uh, and however, I don't think that's related to the leak occurring, though.
Okay. So, a couple other points that I want to get to on this before we go and check in with live chat again. This would just be a quick yes or no question. Do we get an impeachment? Does
Um,
On the
I
statistics you
don't
have
think
right
it's
now, do you
going to
think it?
happen.
You don't think it's
I
going to
don't think
happen?
it's going to happen.
I don't know. They
I
just
mean,
need a simple majority to me,
yeah.
so I think it could. But what do you think?
I, I, in the situation where we do have, without a doubt, that this is a situation where there has indeed Donald Trump has indeed both withheld funds for a purpose that was not an official investigation, then we might have the Democrats going forward with a motion to impeach, which they can pass from the House. However, the Republicans at this point are so defined by Donald Trump that they are likely to simply vote it down in the Senate. So I don't think an impeachment is likely to occur.
And the last point that I want to get to on this is the fact that, I mean, certainly in my lifetime, every Republican president or presidential candidate, even, if we're going back to what people were talking about when they were afraid that they were going to lose the election, has had an attempt or claims of impeachment made against him. Certainly both Bushes, Reagan, everybody since Nixon, for sure, on the Republican side, has been threatened with impeachment. And yet, in history, the only presidents that have the impeachment statistic, both were acquitted by the Senate, but both were Democrats. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think it shows that there is certainly a an element of corruption. Now, that being said, I do believe that the Republicans can be corrupt at times as well, but
Oh,
especially
absolutely.
nowadays. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I don't think it really shows anything that's particularly relevant uh, to today's exact situation, though.
Okay. Well, let's check in with the live chat here. I kind of glanced at it a bit earlier. It looked like we had a couple of questions here, and then we'll move on to 2020 watch. So let's see, where did we leave off? By the way, yes, I am reading the whole chat. So let's see, my all caps. Well, a lot of people are going all caps. I think it might be time to get a moderator because all caps do kind of um, I don't know, they interrupt the flow of things. April Hart asked, why is it a problem that he would withhold funds? I've heard other people say this and I don't get it. And I think you touched on this a little bit as we were going along,
Yeah,
but
the problem isn't that he's withholding funds, it's the reason that he's believed to have withheld funds, and that's for an unofficial investigation, which are funds that have been officially by Congress assigned to the Ukraine, but if he's withholding them for an unofficial investigation, that would be a bit of an abuse of his powers as president.
Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? Ron Helton says he wished Congress did care about whistleblowers who exposed the government's corruption, Snowden, Assange, Manning, Binney, etc., but they don't. This is all politics. Which, yeah, that is a good point to there. I mean, the people that are exposing the corruption as a whole rather than political parties do seem to have a more negative view of them than the anonymous source that is involved in this one. What do you think of that?
The anonymous source.
Well, just the fact that the people that expose the corruption on the whole are smeared up and down, and yet the person that is involved in this direct source is a hero to the left.
Well, we see that on the other sides as well, where Edward Snowden was praised very much during the Obama years by certain individuals opposing him until he went to Russia. That is, in which case there was still a lot of praise, but not as much, because he brought out a lot of things about the broad espionage that exists in American society.
Thought I saw another question, but I must run past it there. So we'll circle back to the chat here after the next topic. But for now, we're going to talk about the Democratic field in 2020 and some of the stories that have gone on from there. And one of the biggest stories that I've noted out of this week, and the candidates have been fairly quiet because we've got a bigger news story going on. But the biggest story I've seen out of the 2020 field right now is the fact that Gabbard is going to make it up on the debate stage for this next upcoming debate. And I am kind of interested to see that. Now, given the fact that she is going to be up on the stage, that brings the field to 12 people, and the DNC has decided that we need to have a two-night event for this again. Conspiracy theorists have said that the fact that Gabbard was not on the stage or on the stage rather, for the last debate was because they didn't want her to go back after Elizabeth Warren like she did with Kamala Harris. But now that they're going to two nights, and we're thinking of the fact that the random generator is going to start pairing people up in a certain way, and we don't think that Warren is going to be on the same night as Tulsi Gabbard, I'm interested what you think about the idea that Gabbard didn't make the last debate, but she's going to make this debate.
Well, I think that in my view, Tulsi Gabbard is certainly one of the more level-headed candidates, and she has a very appealing personality, and that's something that I would say makes her probably one of the more electable candidates. That's assuming she makes it past the field of more popular opponents. Particularly, I think she would probably be one of the best matchups against Donald Trump. Now, I personally don't like her policies, but I would say that out of the current Democratic candidates, she certainly is my favorite. Now, when it concerns the opposition that some of the Democrats have had against her, this certainly is something that is very apparent in the sense that she has been accused by some as being involved with Russian collusion,
Oh, yes.
and
That is great. I love
and
that.
and of course by the fact that she actually has sane policies regarding the border. She's very outstanding among a lot of the other Democrats who don't really see that as something uh, to really hold to as much.
So, on the random generator, do you think that she is going to wind up on the stage with Elizabeth Warren?
Um, could you repeat that?
On the random generator for who goes on what night when they do a two-night event, do you think Tulsi is on the stage with Elizabeth Warren at the end of it?
If she were, that would be very interesting because, of course, as you may have mentioned, Elizabeth is certainly rising in the polls at the moment, anyway,
Mm-hmm.
especially after she was very relatable in the last debate. And I think that that certainly lends itself to her popularity coming out of that. Although I personally would say that I preferred Biden in that debate.
I preferred that none of them get anywhere near the White House, except for the fact that Biden's already been there. But that's
Yeah,
just me, because they're all nuts. But you brought up the next point that I had on this, and this is the fact that, yes, like I said, Elizabeth Warren is moving up in the polls right now. And I do think that does relate to the fact that they're going to try and keep Tulsi Gabbard and Elizabeth Warren separated because Tulsi got a good shot in on Kamala Harris. I don't know why Kamala Harris is even running right now at this point. And certainly, if Harris would drop out, we would drop back down to a one night debate, and guess who would be on the stage together? Tulsi, or Kamala Harris rather, holds the power to put Tulsi Gabbard on the stage with Elizabeth Warren and let those claws come out with her, just like they did against Kamala Harris 2 debates ago.
I think the one that should drop out is Castro. In the last debate, he didn't really seem to have anything to offer other than putting jabs against the more popular candidates.
Yeah, he does seem kind of like a spoiler candidate, doesn't he?
Yeah,
Not like Bernie, of course. Bernie is like the ultimate spoiler candidate.
at least at least Kamala Harris has more meme potential.
Now, you said that the relatable appearance in the last debate has put Warren up in the polls. I look at this a little bit of a different direction. I look at the fact that, I mean, Biden is going through this right now. We just spent a half an hour talking about Joe Biden's son and how that related to everything. And, I mean, that's got to be weighing on him. And I have this feeling that, I got this feeling that Biden and Tulsi are going to be on the stage together, and Tulsi's going to take out her aggression on Biden and take him out. What do you think of that?
You mean Tulsi is going to take her aggression on Biden and take him out?
Yeah, I think
Um,
she's going to launch a series of questions at him like she did at Kamala, and he's going to
well,
drop out at this point.
well, I think the problem with that is Biden was one of the leading candidates for the last debate. So I don't think that anything that Tulsi does would perhaps uh, aggressively oppose Biden in a sense that it would cause him to drop out ultimately. It might cause him a loss in the polls, but it certainly would not, in my opinion, cause any dropout, as far as I can tell. But of
Right.
course, if she is going to attack a candidate, it is going to be a candidate like Biden or one of the other leading candidates, Warren, Sanders, even Kamala.
Right, but I look at this too, and I think about the fact that you're right. Tulsi's attack probably would not take Biden out directly, given the fact that he has been leading in almost every single poll from long before he ever even entered the race. But this, coupled with the Ukrainian thing, might put the nail in the coffin together. The two of them could work in conjunction together, but I don't think one is necessarily going to directly be the end over the other. What do you think?
Um, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. I don't know exactly. I haven't seen enough of Tulsi to know exactly what she would bring out of her bag of polemics, but I'd certainly be interested in seeing what happens.
I think this is the second to last debate, correct? We'll have one more after this, and then everybody goes out and schmoozes a little bit before Super Tuesday. Is that accurate, or is this the last one?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Uh, I don't know the debate schedule. I apologize.
I wish they would have a debate after they started doing primaries. I think that would be a lot more useful than just throwing all of this at each other before people start voting, but or at least closer to the primaries. It was 12 months out before the first primary, before they did the first debate.
Yeah,
Everything's going to shift between then and there, and I don't know. The DNC is weird, and they have a weird structure about everything.
yeah, with super delegates
Yes,
keeping staggered.
that's where my Twitter name came from. Jen the Libertarian and I were talking about the superdelegate system, and I said, I just want to arbitrarily be called super in my career, whether I do something beneficial or not. And then I changed my Twitter name to the Super Podcaster.
Yeah,
Yeah,
call
that's not
me
conceit.
the
That's actually where that came from.
yeah. I'm
Uh,
a yeah.
I ask every guest the same three questions before we close out this topic. First
Okay.
question, of course, is going to be with the statistics of what we had over the last week and what we know going into the next debate. Who do you think, out of the field that is currently standing, is going to be the nominee to face Trump?
Out of a field that is currently standing, I think Elizabeth Warren certainly has a good chance. Since I don't think that Bernie is burning as hot as he used to. Biden is getting a he's losing his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
People are thinking that he's senile in the chat. Um, so
Oh, I haven't even looked
that
at
that
that.
certainly is something. And Kamala Harris probably isn't going to be able to keep up. So I think Elizabeth Warren certainly is a safe pick.
Yeah, it's getting more and more like that. That this is going to be the who's going to be the safer one, and I knew that from the beginning that this was going to be an election about who is safe, and I think that's part of the reason that Biden stayed on the top so long. Okay, so if I mean we're looking at the fact that on the Republican side, Trump seems to be like he's going to be the nominee, but if you had to choose one of the members of the left for the presidential campaign, and you had to have one of them as the president, you didn't have a choice from the other side, which one of the current standing field would you rather see? Who's the lesser of 23 evils?
Tulsi Gabbard certainly.
I kind of figured you were going to go with that, just kind of the discussion that we had earlier. I kind
Yeah,
of agree with
she.
that. I don't like Yang. I think
Yeah,
he's too cocky for this, but I mean, Tulsi, I think, is. I think she could be stymied enough by the Congress to keep her from passing anything major and sweeping, but for the
yeah. I
most
think
part,
she's also more likely to respect Congress as well.
respect Congress and respect the military.
Yeah, unlike Kamala Harris, who says, "Well, we have a constitution, but maybe we shouldn't follow it."
Yeah, that scared me a little bit, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
All right. Lastly, for pure entertainment value, no statistics, no policy behind it. Which opponent do you want to see stand against Trump on the debate stage? Who do you want to see him debating for the laughs and for the popcorn eating?
Okay. So if it can be anyone,
Out
can
of
it be
the
anyone?
out of the standing field that we have right now.
Out of the standing field that we have right now,
Yep.
uh, Andrew Yang would be I don't know why, but I think it'd be interesting. They're both businessmen. They're Andrew Yang has some interesting ideas about economics that I don't agree with at all, but it'd be interesting him trying to make a case up against Donald Trump.
And they're both showmen too. I can actually see exactly where you're coming from on that. Because they
Yeah.
stand on the stage and they put on a show. And I mean, Yang is out there dancing and partying up with his fans. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He would be a great one to watch on the debate stage. That's the first time I've heard that on that question too. So props to that.
Maybe they can do a waltz together, have a dance.
Oh, oh, somebody needs to make that in Photoshop somewhere. That would be great. All right, let's check in with the live chat here and see if we got any questions up here. Um, yes, let's see. Tulsi was dropped from the last debate lineup. Right, that is correct. They were. Let's see. A lot of discussion on caps in here, so I I do appreciate everybody out there for being in the chat and having this discussion. That is great. Yeah, absolutely. Keep chatting amongst yourselves. April Hart brought up a good point, though. Every single day there's been a negative story about Trump. The corporate media, pretty sure the point of them doing that is to delegitimize him in the eyes of the people. Yeah, that's been a thing right from the beginning. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't look like. No, all the other questions that I see in here are related to the conversation that's going on in the chat right now. So let's take some time here and let's move on to this Des Moines Register story. Now, a
Yeah.
fan of, I believe it was an Iowa fan, during their annual cross state game, put up a sign saying that he was out of beer money and to send him a little bit of money on a Venmo link for him to buy beer with. Now, this went viral. They put this up on the big screen. And all of a sudden, this random fan has thousands upon thousands of dollars coming in onto Venmo. So, as per an agreement, he came out on TV and made a public statement that he would take out the amount that it would cost for a case of Busch Light. So he would take $5 out of the fund, and he would donate the rest of this to charity.
Yeah.
Now, Anheuser-Busch came out after finding out about this and agreed that they would as well match the donation that this fan of the football, and I didn't write his name down. I should have written this. I looked this up right before we went live.
I heard this as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, they turned around and they said they were going to match this. Then a reporter for the Des Moines Register did some digging, went back through the Twitter history of this gentleman, and found out that he had made an offensive joke, quoting Tosh.0, back when he was 16. I believe that was 8 years ago. He had made this offensive joke. And suddenly this became the central focus point of the news, and Anheuser-Busch pulled back their support for the fan, and they pulled back their charity, which is just awful. So, what did you see on this?
Well, I don't know anything about any kosher sandwiches, but what I do know about this particular event is that the original time frame in which the original tweet that this individual was accused of making, he had made it. It was 8 years ago, so that's quite some time. A lot can change. Whole different presidency 8 years ago, and it was when he was 16, which is underage.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, what this reporter did is he took an 8-year-old tweet from someone who at the time was underage, and he expressed that as if that was a relevant or perhaps accurate viewpoint of what was being said on by this individual nowadays, which of course it isn't. Now,
I want to put one correction into this here. The person who held the sign up was named Carson King, and the reporter was Aaron Kelvin. I just went back and looked that up again.
Yeah.
So,
but as I had mentioned earlier, there's a reason why we don't allow children to vote, and that's because we don't consider the political opinions of underage individuals to have the same value as those who are more matured. And because of that, it means that if we then take a statement that someone who's underage makes that might be a bit of a controversial statement, well, I think it's justified to perhaps be critical of the statement. I don't think it's justifiable to take that statement and to make that statement something that then we use to define that individual. Now, when it concerns the reporter eventually, as you might know, they found that he himself had made certain not politically correct statements in the past, which of course means that he himself got in trouble as well. And what's interesting is on his statement, where he was responding to the particular accusation that had been made, he at no point acknowledged that there was any hypocrisy or that he had been wrong in making his original accusation.
oh, of course not. Of course, he's a reporter. He's guarded by the First Amendment. He's holier than thou. He's all kinds of things that he could come up with at that point. So I don't know. Here's the problem that I have with this. The left seems to be, well, not just the left, but I mean the cancel culture side of society seems to be in favor of having a sliding scale depending on the viewpoints of the speaker who is a minor. They'll take what Greta Thunberg says seriously, and they'll take what David Hogg says seriously while he's a minor, and yet they will castigate someone like Nick Sandmann or Carson King because they're in the wrong on something or other. The right seems to be pretty consistent on things because, like you said, we don't want to take the words that somebody tweeted out when he was 16 as seriously because he was just trying to figure out what's offensive, what's not, and he's still developing at that point. But we also don't want to take seriously the political opinions of Miss Thunberg or Mr. Hogg or any of the other Parkland survivors. And while we are in defense of Nick Sandmann, because he was wronged by that entire situation, we don't take his political affiliation, or his opinions rather, into account. Yeah, to an extent, we take his affiliation into account, but not his opinions. So I see a change in consistency on both sides of this. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the standard that I personally uphold is that I will not take things from several years back and assume that they are particularly relevant to the current situation, especially if they were made while the individual was underage, because I know that, especially even into the mid 20s, the brain is still in development. So the way people think changes over time. So of course, the political viewpoints that someone might have are not going to be the same. Now, I will say that when someone is currently making a statement or when someone has made a statement in the past, I think it's fine to be critical of the statement in itself. But unless we can establish that the current individual holds those same views as the past individual and is and has that as part of that person's identity, I don't think it's justifiable to place that as a valid criticism of that individual. So, what I think is that the reporter uh, did not do a good job in doing that. What I think he should have done is he should have simply discarded it as something that was irrelevant, or perhaps asked the individual first whether those were still his views regarding whatever he had written.
And
So
let's not forget the fact that the biggest the victims in this entire thing are the children that were going to be receiving the charity from both Carson King and Anheuser Busch. Because not only are you ruining Carson King's life when you're going back and finding something from when he was a kid and trying to hold it against him from years ago, the kids are the real victims in all of this. I don't know.
well, I think that maybe we should have our own alcohol charity where we raise $1 million, and then if we get that, we donate that to charity minus the amount required to purchase a case of Guinness to give to John from Generational Gap.
Oh, is John in the chat?
No, but he doesn't like Guinness for political reasons. No, I was just memeing on you, but
Oh.
I do think that yeah, it is certainly a loss in a way, in that it is something that had been promised, but I do believe that he still has the original money he himself raised, so he can
Mm-hmm.
still give that. So in that sense, it's not a complete loss as to what could have happened. Now, when it concerns the company in itself, $1 million is small peanuts to a company that produces many thousands of units every day. So it certainly is something that they probably had a certain amount of money that was dedicated to giving to charity for tax reasons, and are probably going to give it anyway, perhaps not to the same exact charity, though.
I bet you Johnny Walker wouldn't care what my tweets said in the past. Let's get them on board. Let's get them to donate a bunch of money to charity. That sounds like a good thing. All right, let's check back with the chat one more time here, and then I've got one more topic, and I'm actually pretty excited to talk about this with your views on philosophy on the air. So let's see if we have questions here. Great discussion going on. I'm pretty excited about that. doesn't look like we've got any questions out for this, but great discussion going on anyway here. So let's talk about the Joker. Now, it's been known for a while that there was going to be a movie coming out starring Joaquin Phoenix, highlighting the backstory of the Joker, which has come from mixed reviews from fans to begin with. Because the Joker having a backstory, I mean, he does have a backstory in the comics, but it's not usually as highlighted because he's just a chaotic evil for the most part. Having the backstory does taint that kind of a bit, and
Well, it depends on which
yeah,
generation Joker you're talking
yeah,
about.
exactly. That's the other thing. I mean, Dark Knight Joker, you don't really need to know his backstory to know that he just wants to watch the world burn.
Yeah, I personally like the Jack Nicholson Joker very much.
That is classic. That's a great one. But Joaquin Phoenix Joker, the movie came out and it shows the life of a failed comic who has had many, many things go bad against him in his life. And it drove him to the point of insanity and turned him into a homicidal maniac. And the first concern that came out before any of the other cancel cultures came out was the fact that this, coupled with gun culture in the country, is going to put us in a situation in which large swaths of incel America would look at the Joaquin Phoenix Joker and see a hero for their cause and try to emulate all of this. And now there are calls to see the Joker movie get canceled because of this. Now, of course, the first problem we have that we see on the beginning of the mainstream culture is the gun violence to all of this because that might happen. But I mean, for the most part, the original outrage was the fact that this might inspire incels to take matters into their own hands. What do you think about this whole situation?
Now, when it concerns the movie, of course, the Joker, being the main character of a movie, has to be portrayed somewhat sympathetic and relatable. And I think this really, I haven't seen the movie, of course, but when it relates to the movie, I think it is very interesting that this is coming out nowadays, as it is something that relates to that, and that really calls attention to some of these problems where individuals aren't getting the help that they need, the mental help that they might need. They
Mm-hmm.
aren't resolving problems in the ways that they should. And I think the point that is being made in the movie is that there needs to be some sort of help, there needs to be some sort of support that people can fall back on. And I think that's the point that the movie makers are probably trying to make. Now, and also the point that because this is relatable, it shows that this is something that can happen to any of us in some respect. And I would say that even more severe radicalization can happen to anyone, as you see with what happened with Nazis, radical socialists, or any other radical movement. Most of the rank and file followers are just normal people like you and me who either bought into the ideology because they were persuaded in some way, or simply for utilitarian reasons joined into it. Now, when it concerns the Joker, we also have to remember that the Joker is a villain.
Mm-hmm.
So to assume that people would be willing to immediately emulate the villain himself is not really uh, a charitable assumption of the American people. Now, when it concerns incels, I will say that their involuntary celibacy is probably not the root cause of their problems. Because I myself am not someone who is sexually active, and I'm not involuntarily so. It's just that I'm not actively seeking anything currently. And I don't have any homicidal tendencies that are linked to not being sexually active. So I would say that although their inability to couple with individuals is something that is contributing to problems that they might be having emotionally, I would say that it certainly is not the root cause. The root cause is something that is deeper, in a sense that it could be in a way that they themselves might be treated socially in a way that could, in some ways, relate to why they have become incels, but in other ways, it could relate in how politically and socially culture is changing to perhaps be more hostile to these types of people that in the past they might have been more willing to help, which is something that I guess the movie speaks to in some respect. Now, in another way, I would say that this also is when it relates to questions of homicide. These are things that people do of their own volition.
Hmm.
These are things that people do from their own minds. That's where, in my opinion, the evil derives. It's that it derives from themselves. Now, it might be influenced by their society, but it is something that they themselves choose to do. And that is something that is based on how their environment affects them and how they are treated, and also how they, in as a paradigm, view their surroundings. So while I say that these individuals, in part, are probably being led to this by how society is treating them, another huge component is how they themselves react to the treatment that they are receiving. And I see in history that there are many groups that have been marginalized for this, for that, or the other reason. In fact, my co-religionists of the past are some such groups, and I will say that what we see is that there are different ways different groups react to this. Some groups do not react violently, other groups do react violently. So, what we have to do is we have to do two things. We have to encourage these individuals to have self control and to build themselves up in order to be stronger and in order to be the kinds of people that can succeed in a society. At the same time, however, I don't want to say that this is something that should be fully on their fault. We have to also build our society in a way that is accepting of these individuals in particular and that is willing to help them to the extent that we need to acknowledge that there is, as people have mentioned in the comments section here, that there's someone that says there's a war on white men. And in the sense that I don't necessarily agree to that per se, but I will say that with the American left, it is one of the few groups that has a huge outgroup bias. Where in the American left, what you have is that white men are less preferred than pretty much any other group to these individuals. So in that sense, they are being de-emphasized in a way that does not occur in most societies. Now, I don't think that that is necessarily unique in a sense that it is something that is particular to them because they are white, in a sense that it is something that couldn't happen in a different society. I think these things could also happen in a different society as well. But what I think is that the far left has gone to such an extreme with their attempt to equalize society that they have gone into what they have tried to avoid in the first place, and that is racism. That on the far left, you do have a situation where they are in some ways engaged in racism and misandry in the sense that they want to fix society in a way and they have an obsession with historical and heretical wrongs that need to be righted, which in the sense of our legal system and our system of justice, that is something that is unjust, constitutionally speaking, that we should accuse individuals for the crimes of their predecessors. I don't think that's good. And unfortunately, that is the view that the left has with its collectivism nowadays. So, what do you think?
I I do like what you were saying, and especially I pointed out, or I acknowledged rather, when you said that yes, the individuals that cause this kind of violence do need to have they need they need to look within themselves to try and correct the violence. But yes, you are absolutely right on that. I started this channel because while I couldn't condone the fact that the Parkland kid shot up all those kids, I knew that a part of that came from the fact that he was ostracized and bullied. Society also pushed him to the he did need to look inside himself and take responsibility for his own actions and try and stop himself from doing that, but the society wasn't helping him along. It's a two-way process. It is a two-way street to this.
Yeah,
And honestly, the Joker is a fictional character. If people are looking to the Joker as a villain and a fictional character to try and fulfill their lives' missions for that, I mean, that's a bigger problem to society than it is to some writer that actually wants to make a buck off a story from a character that we're all familiar with and we want to know more about.
yeah. The fact is, we live in a society, and the society which we build should not be a society that is self-destructive. It should not be a society that essentially breeds this type of action, a society that leads individuals to this type of violence. And that's why I'm in favor of a lot of decentralization locally, because I think that that would allow individuals to build societies that are friendly to the kinds of ideas they have, and they don't have to fight over this, that, or the other thing, because they can live in a society that is actually receptive to their ideas, and in a society that actually functions and can sustain itself.
I want to take a second. I want to address a question that was actually highlighted to me in the chat. April Hart says, "What do you think about taking away women's rights to make a more stable society? Repeal the Equal Pay Act and Civil Rights Act, for example, so the free market can decide what a woman's labor is worth and will inevitably decide it's not worth as much as a man's." I'm halfway on the same page with Miss Hart on this. I am not in favor of taking away anybody's individual rights because I'm not a collectivist, I'm an individualist. However, getting the government intervention out of things, on all things, is going to make things a better society. Now, yes, people should be paid equally for the same work, but they should be paid equally for the same amount of hours that they do as well. So if a woman takes off her maternity leave, she's obviously going to get paid less for taking off for maternity leave, to take off to take care of the kids. Those are obviously going to be factors in this. We can have a free market for labor without pushing government intervention to the other direction to try and skew it in one's favor. And that's what I have to say on that.
Yeah, I say that in relation to how much it concerns equal pay, I think that what should happen, from my point of view anyway,
Mm-hmm.
is that questions relating to how much people should be paid and affirmative action and equal pay and all of that should be something that really should be left to the local governments to decide.
That's
Because
the
I
other
think
thing too.
that
You're absolutely right.
if people that are leftists really want this, I think they should be allowed to get together and do this, as long as they don't force anybody else to be involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I think individuals who want to have a more traditional family structure should also be allowed to have that as well. Now, when it concerns actually taking away people's rights, let's say to vote, I don't think that that's something that should happen, because I think that especially if things are localized, what you have is that, in my opinion, then such opinions are actually more valuable because they are more relevant to the situation that is being addressed.
And that's fair. Like I say, it's individual for me. And some people don't want to have families. I know several women that don't want to have any children at all for whatever reason. They should be able to make a living as they see fit. So that's where I stand on that. It's an individual thing, but let's get the federal government out of things and let the local governments sort it out. So I'm going to
Yeah.
check back with the live chat for the last time for the night. So let's look see if there is any other question in here. U.S. going to war with Iran tonight? No, we're not going to be in on that, unfortunately, because that was swept aside by the impeachment news, and Now it seems like nobody in America remembers that it even happened. I remember talking about it was Saudi Arabia, not Israel, but still. Other than that, looks like voting isn't an individualist principle because individualists see democracy as collectivist, right? Well, here's the reality on individualism versus collectivism, and this is for collectivism that goes on both sides. I like to cite socialism for the example of this. Free market versus socialism. If socialists want to get together and pool all their money together and make a socialist agrarian society, my free market values will not stop them from doing that. They can 10 or 15 of them can get together, collect their money together, and distribute it equally among themselves. But their philosophy requires my participation, and I don't like that, and I am not going to participate in that. So that's where I see on that. But other than that, I think we're all caught up right now. So the last question I always ask my guests is, because politics is such a divisive thing, and we talk about movies being canceled for people being incels and just all kinds of other fun stuff like that, I like to leave the show on a positive note. So tell me about a hobby that you have that has nothing to do with work or politics. It could be an album that you're listening to, a book you've picked up, a video game that you've tried, just something that helps you unwind and get away from the fact that politics is running our lives right now.
Well, I, I I I do enjoy politics, so it's not something I necessarily do to get away from it. But I am a martial artist. I do taekwondo.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a second dan, uh, so a second degree black belt. By many, I'm considered to be one of the best in the school that I am currently in my dojang. So if you want to fight me in real life, it's probably not going to be an easy fight. Although John from the generational gap, I'm coming for you, man.
Yeah, you and him are going to be doing some HEMA in the near future, if I heard this correctly.
Maybe we'll see what happens.
I want to thank the audience for having a great chat over in the live chat here, bringing up some good questions, helping us keep on what we're keeping on with here. If you want to finish the conversation with me, you can find me over on Twitter. That is at Edsblog Twitter with a one in place of the I. Or you can find my Facebook, my Gab, my Minds. All of that is linked down in the description below. If you want to finish the conversation with Anavultus, why don't you tell us where they can find you?
Well, you can find me on YouTube. The name of my channel is Anavultus. You can also see my videos on BitChute under the same name, and also you can follow me on Twitter at Anavultus. The easiest way to contact me is probably to simply leave a comment on one of my recent videos.
Mm-hmm.
Since I don't have too much traffic, it's probably the fastest way that you'll get to contacting me.
And you will find that again linked in the description below. And hey, if you're going down into that description below and you liked what you saw, why don't you go ahead and hit that like button? That tells YouTube what people should be watching, and it helps fight the algorithmic demotion that YouTube is putting against independent commentary. And if you could catch this live, or you're catching up with us right at the end here, you can find this on demand again on YouTube, or you can find it over on BitChute. That is linked in the description below. Edsworld is available on the audio platforms. This will be up on Tuesday morning on the audio. This will be Google Play, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. And if you're over on Apple, why don't you leave us that 5-star rating and a good review that helps us move up the charts. Lastly, Edsworld is proudly partnered with the Freedom Scoop Media Group. Make sure you go over there and check out the other great podcasts that we have over there, some good writing that we have over there as well. You'll find The Generational Gap, who we mentioned before, whose show you've been on before, and Stephen Ignoramus is our other big podcast contributor. You can go over there and check out his stuff as well. You've been on that show too, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
As we always say over on Ed's World, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Anavultus, you have last word.
Well, thank you all for watching, and I'll be sure to really research the Superfoot style, which I hear is the best. And thanks, Domestic Tranquility. It was great to have you watching. And I'll be seeing you all next time. Anavultus over and out.
Take care.